I stepped into the lakefront villa wearing scuffed flats, only to hear his mother whisper asking if someone had let the help in the wrong door. I smiled, playing the part of the penniless girl perfectly. They had no idea that I did not come here tonight for an introduction. I came to set a trap. Their fatal error was believing that my naivety was anything other than a weapon. My name is Natalie Patterson, and as I maneuvered my gray-dented sedan up the winding driveway, I looked less like a woman coming to meet her future in-laws and more like someone delivering a pizza to the wrong tax bracket. The car was a 2011 model with a suspension that groaned over every pebble and an engine that sounded like a heavy smoker trying to clear their throat. It was the perfect prop. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror one last time. I was 33 years old, but tonight I had styled my hair in a loose, slightly messy bun that made me look younger and significantly less put together. I wore a polyester dress that I had bought off a clearance rack for $20, and on my wrist sat a bracelet that claimed to be gold, but was rapidly turning my skin a faint shade of green. I parked the car next to a line of pristine luxury vehicles that looked like they were huddled together in fear of catching rust from my sedan. The house before me was not just a home, it was a statement. The Kingsley Estate in Lake Forest, Illinois, was a sprawling architectural beast of stone and glass, designed to intimidate anyone foolish enough to walk up the front steps without a trust fund. I cut the engine, listening to the fan rattle and die, and took a deep breath. This was it, the performance of a lifetime. I stepped out onto the gravel, my scuffed flats making a crunching sound that seemed aggressively loud in the quiet evening air. As I approached the massive oak double doors, they were already partially open. I raised my hand to knock, but a voice drifted out from the foyer, sharp and clear. Did the agency send the maid to the front door again? Honestly, it is so hard to find competent help these days. I froze. The voice belonged to a woman, cultured but laced with the kind of casual cruelty that comes from never having to clean up your own messes. It was Veronica Kingsley, Ethan's mother. I lowered my hand. I could have turned around. I could have announced myself loudly. Instead, I stood there in the shadow of the portico, letting the insults sink into my skin. I needed to remember that tone. I needed to remember that she looked at a woman in affordable shoes and saw a servant. I counted to 3, plastered a nervous, apologetic smile on my face, and stepped into the light just as Ethan appeared in the doorway. "Natalie," Ethan said, his voice a little too loud, a little too bright. He stepped out to meet me, closing the distance quickly, as if he wanted to intercept me before I contaminated the porch. He was handsome in that classic, manufactured way square jaw, expensive haircut, and a suit that cost more than the car I had just arrived in. He took my hands, and for a split second, I saw his eyes dart down to my shoes, then to the cheap fabric of my dress. A flicker of shame passed through his gaze. It was microscopic, a blink-and-you-miss-it moment, but I saw it. He was embarrassed. He leaned in and kissed me, but it felt performative. It was a kiss meant for an audience, a way to show anyone watching that he was noble enough to love a commoner. "You made it," he said, pulling back but not quite looking me in the eye. "Mom and Dad are inside. They are dying to meet you." "I hope I'm not underdressed," I whispered, hunching my shoulders slightly to make myself look smaller. "I came straight from you know." "You look fine," he lied. "Just be yourself. That is who I fell in love with." I followed him inside, my heart beating with a steady, predatory rhythm. Ethan thought he was bringing home a stray dog he had rescued. He thought I was Natalie Patterson, the struggling freelancer who lived in a studio apartment the size of a closet and clipped coupons to survive. He thought I was grateful for his attention, dazzled by his world, and desperate for his protection. He was wrong. What Ethan and his terrifying mother did not know was that the woman walking into their foyer was actually the director of security architecture for Northbridge Ledger, one of the fastest-growing fintech companies on the West Coast. They did not know that the freelance coding I told Ethan I did was actually high-level encryption design. They did not know that I held 3 patents for blockchain security protocols that were currently being leased by major international banks. They certainly did not know that my annual bonuses alone could likely pay off the mortgage on this monstrosity of a house. I had money, I had power, but I also had a lesson burned into my soul by the woman who raised me. My Aunt Marie was not my blood relative, but she was the only family that mattered. She had been a titan in the shipping industry, a woman who built an empire from dust, but she drove a 10-year-old truck and wore flannel shirts until the day she died. She used to tell me, over bowls of oatmeal in her kitchen, that wealth is a mask. If you want to see a person's true face, you have to make them think you have nothing to offer them. Character, she would say, tapping the table with a calloused finger, is how you treat people who can do absolutely nothing for you. Tonight, I was going to find out exactly who the Kingsleys were. I had done my homework. To the outside world, the Kingsleys were pillars of the Midwest business community, regulars at charity galas, and owners of a diversified portfolio of assets. But in my line of work, you learn to look for the cracks in the foundation. I had run a quiet, passive background check on their public records. I saw leverage upon leverage. I saw loans taken out to pay other loans. I saw a family that was drowning in debt but refusing to stop swimming in champagne. They were desperate, and desperate people are dangerous. We walked into the main living area, a cavernous space with vaulted ceilings and a chandelier that looked like an explosion of crystal. 3 people were waiting. The woman who had spoken earlier stood by the fireplace. Veronica Kingsley was beautiful in a brittle, preserved way, like a flower pressed between the pages of a heavy book. She held a glass of white wine as if it were a weapon. Beside her stood a man who looked like he was shrinking inside his own suit. Gordon Kingsley, Ethan's father, had the tired, hollow eyes of a man who had been running a sprint for 30 years and was just realizing he was on a treadmill. And then there was the sister. Sloane Kingsley sat on a velvet sofa, scrolling through her phone. She looked up as we entered, her eyes scanning me from head to toe in under 2 seconds. "Mother, Dad," Ethan announced, his hand resting possessively on the small of my back. "This is Natalie." Veronica glided forward. She did not extend a hand. Instead, she tilted her head, offering a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Natalie," she said, the name rolling off her tongue like she was tasting something slightly spoiled. "Ethan has told us so much about you, and look at you. You are so earthy." "It is a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Kingsley," I said, keeping my voice soft and deferential. "You have a beautiful home." "Yes, we do," she replied, turning back to the fireplace. "It has been in the family for generations. Well, the land has. We rebuilt the main house in 1998 to accommodate our collection." She did not ask what collection. She assumed I wouldn't understand art anyway. Sloane stood up then, smoothing out a silk dress that probably cost $4,000. She walked over to me, invading my personal space just enough to be uncomfortable. She smelled of expensive perfume and aggression. "So you are the mystery girl," Sloane said. She reached out and touched the fabric of my sleeve, rubbing the cheap polyester between her thumb and forefinger with a look of mock curiosity. "Ethan says you are a freelancer. That sounds so free. I suppose it must be nice not to have the burden of a career." "I enjoy the flexibility," I said, forcing a shy smile. "It pays the bills." "Does it?" Sloane laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Well, aren't you just a cute girl like a little survivor?" I swallowed the urge to tell her that my little survivor job involved securing transaction layers for billions of dollars in daily trades. Instead, I looked down at the floor. "I try my best." "Ethan," Gordon spoke up for the first time. His voice was gravelly and low. "Drinks? Or are we moving to the dining room?" "Actually," Ethan said, looking relieved to break the tension, "we have one more guest. Right is Miles here." "I am right here." A voice came from the archway leading to the library. A man stepped into the room. He was older, perhaps in his late 50s, with silver hair and a sharp, intelligent face that seemed out of place among the vacuous luxury of the Kingsleys. This was Miles Hartman. I knew him from my research. He was a family friend, a silent investor in many of Gordon's early ventures, and a man with a reputation for being ruthless but fair. He walked toward us, his gaze fixed on me. He did not look at my dress. He did not look at my shoes. He looked straight into my eyes, and for a moment, the air in the room seemed to thin. "Natalie," Ethan said, "this is Miles Hartman. He's practically an uncle to us." "Nice to meet you, Mr. Hartman," I said, extending my hand. He took it. His grip was firm, dry, and lingering. He didn't let go immediately. He was studying my face, searching for something in the geometry of my jawline or the set of my eyes. "Natalie Patterson, is it?" Miles asked. His voice had a strange weight to it. "Yes, sir," I said. "Patterson." He frowned, a tiny crease appearing between his eyebrows. It wasn't confusion. It was recognition. "Patterson," he repeated, almost to himself. "From Oregon." My heart skipped a beat. I had not mentioned Oregon to anyone but Ethan, and even then, I had been vague about the specifics. But my Aunt Marie Patterson had been a legend in the logistics world on the West Coast before she retired to a simple life. Miles Hartman dealt in supply chains. It was a long shot, a 1 in a million chance. But panic flared in my chest. If he knew who my aunt was, if he knew the name Patterson was attached to the shipping fortune that had quietly been liquidated and reinvested into tech trusts. My cover was blown before the first course was served. I kept my face perfectly neutral, widening my eyes in feigned innocence. "Yes, Eugene, do you know it?" He stared at me for another second, his eyes narrowing slightly as he processed the information. He looked at my cheap dress, my scuffed shoes, and then back at my face. He was doing the math. He was trying to reconcile the name of a powerful family with the waif-like creature standing in front of him. "I have passed through," Miles said slowly, finally releasing my hand. "A long time ago. You remind me of someone." "I have one of those faces," I said, letting out a nervous little laugh. "People are always telling me I look like their cousin or their old babysitter." "No," Miles said, his voice dropping an octave. "Not a babysitter." "Miles, stop interrogating the poor girl," Veronica called out from the dining room entrance. "She looks like she is about to faint. Come along, everyone, dinner is served, and I will not have the soufflé fall while we discuss geography." Ethan took my arm, guiding me away from Miles. "Don't mind him," he whispered. "Miles thinks he knows everyone. He is harmless." I allowed myself to be led toward the dining room, but the hair on the back of my neck was standing up. Miles Hartman was not harmless. He was the variable I hadn't accounted for. As I walked past him, I felt his eyes drilling into my back. He suspected something. The way he had said Patterson wasn't casual. It was a question. I entered the dining room, a space dominated by a mahogany table long enough to land a small aircraft on. The table was set with enough silverware to perform a major surgery. I took the seat Ethan pulled out for me, acutely aware that I was walking into a minefield. I had come here to test Ethan, to see if he would stand up for me when his family sharpened their knives. I had come to see if the Kingsleys were just snobs, or if they were something worse. But now, with Miles Hartman sitting across from me, unfolding his napkin with deliberate precision, the game had changed. I wasn't just the hunter anymore. I was in the cage with them. "So, Natalie," Veronica said as she took her seat at the head of the table, signaling the staff to pour the wine. "Tell us, how exactly did you and Ethan meet? I assume it wasn't at a country club." She smiled, waiting for me to stumble. I picked up the heavy crystal goblet, feeling the cold glass against my fingers. I took a sip, letting the expensive vintage wash away the taste of my own anxiety. "No, Mrs. Kingsley," I said, meeting her gaze with the wide, doe-eyed look of a girl who didn't know she was being insulted. "We met at a coffee shop. I spilled my latte on his shoes." "How cinematic," Sloane drawled from across the table. "It was," Ethan said quickly. "It was fate." "Fate," Gordon muttered into his wineglass. "Or an accident." I glanced at Miles. He wasn't looking at Ethan. He was looking at my hands, specifically at the way I held the wineglass by the stem, not the bowl. a habit drilled into me by etiquette classes I had supposedly never taken. I adjusted my grip, wrapping my hand awkwardly around the bowl like a novice. Miles's lips twitched. He saw the correction. This dinner was going to be longer than I thought, and much, much more dangerous. But as I looked around the table at the faces of the people who thought they were better than me, I felt a familiar cold resolve settle in my chest. They wanted a show. They wanted the poor, naive girl who stumbled into their castle. I would give them exactly what they wanted, until it was time to take everything they had. The dining room was a theater of intimidation, and the table was the stage. It was set with enough silverware to intimidate a diplomat. A glistening arsenal of forks and spoons arranged in a code I was supposed to find baffling. I took my seat, acutely aware that Veronica Kingsley was watching me navigate the napkin placement with the intensity of a hawk circling a field mouse. The first course was a lobster bisque that smelled like money in the ocean. As the staff moved silently around us, pouring wine and placing bread, the interrogation began. It did not start with a bang, but with the subtle, rhythmic tapping of Veronica's fingernail against the stem of her wineglass. "So, Natalie," Veronica began, her voice smooth and devoid of genuine warmth. "Ethan tells us you are from Oregon. Eugene. Was it that feels like a world away from Chicago?" "It is quite different," I replied, keeping my voice soft, ensuring my posture was just slumped enough to suggest a lack of confidence. "But it is home, or at least, it was." "And your parents?" she asked. "What do they do?" This was the first trap. In Lake Forest, asking about one's parents was not a polite inquiry into heritage, it was a credit check. "I was actually raised by my aunt," I said, taking a small, hesitant sip of the soup. "My parents passed away when I was very young. My Aunt Marie took me in." "I see," Veronica said, her tone dipping slightly, as if tragedy were something contagious she wanted to avoid catching. "And this aunt she worked—" "She did." I lied by omission. "She was in logistics. She worked very hard." I did not mention that Marie Patterson did not just work in logistics. She owned the logistics. I did not mention that the hard work involved building a shipping conglomerate that dominated the Pacific Northwest before she sold it off to live a quiet life of gardening and reading. To Veronica, logistics sounded like driving a truck or managing a warehouse floor. I could see the judgment settle in her eyes like silt in a riverbed. "Logistics," Sloane echoed from across the table. She was picking at her bread roll, tearing it into tiny pieces without eating them. "That sounds industrial." "It put food on the table," I said simply. "I am sure it did," Sloane said, a smirk playing on her lips. "And you, Ethan says you dabble in computers. Freelance, right?" "I do some coding," I said. "It allows me to work from home." "How charming," Sloane laughed, a sound that was more air than humor. "I suppose that gives you plenty of time for hobbies. What does a girl from Eugene do for fun, knit?" "I like to cook," I said, knowing exactly how basic that sounded to a woman who likely had a private chef on speed dial. "And I enjoy hiking. The trails back home are beautiful." Sloane rolled her eyes, looking at Ethan as if to share a private joke. "Hiking, that is just walking outside where there is dirt, isn't it? I have never understood the appeal of sweating for free. It seems so pedestrian." I felt Ethan shift in his chair beside me. This was his cue. This was the moment a fiancé was supposed to step in, to defend the woman he loved, to say that my passion for nature was grounding, or that my cooking was exceptional. "Natalie makes a great lasagna," Ethan offered weakly. Sloane raised an eyebrow. "Lasagna, heavy carbs. How brave." Ethan fell silent, retreating into his wineglass. I noted his cowardice. It was not a surprise, but it was a confirmation. He was not leading this family. He was surviving it. And right now, throwing me to the wolves was his survival strategy. I turned my attention to Gordon Kingsley. He had barely spoken since we sat down. He was eating mechanically, his eyes fixed on the centerpiece of white roses. He looked exhausted, his skin having a grayish pallor that spoke of sleepless nights and high blood pressure. He looked like a man who was holding up the ceiling with his bare hands and knew his arms were about to give out. "Is everything all right with the business, Mr. Kingsley?" I asked, trying to sound like a polite guest making conversation. Gordon looked up, startled, as if he had forgotten I was there. "What? Oh, yes, fine. The market is volatile, but we are managing." "Volatility is just opportunity in disguise," Veronica interjected sharply, cutting her husband off. "Gordon worries too much. The Kingsley name has weathered worse storms than a little market fluctuation." There was a warning in her voice. "Do not show weakness." Speaking of the Kingsley name, Veronica pivoted, turning her gaze back to me with renewed focus. "We were so hoping you would meet some of our friends tonight, the Waverleys, specifically. You know the Waverleys, don't you, Ethan?" The air in the room changed instantly. It grew colder, tighter. "Mom," Ethan said, his voice straining. "Not now." "Why not?" Veronica asked innocently. "Camille Waverly is such a dear girl. Her family owns that massive auto parts distribution network. You know, the one that supplies half the dealerships in the Midwest." She looked at me, her eyes glittering. "Camille and Ethan grew up together. We always thought well. You know how childhood sweethearts are." I followed her gaze to the wall behind Gordon. There, amidst a gallery of framed family portraits, was a photo that seemed to have been placed there recently. It was Ethan and a striking blonde woman, Camille, presumably standing arm in arm at a gala. They looked perfect. They looked expensive. They looked like a merger, not a couple. "She is a lovely girl," Veronica continued, twisting the knife. "So poised, and she understands our world. She knows the pressure Ethan is under. It takes a certain breeding to handle that kind of stress." I looked at the photo, then at Ethan. He was staring at his soup as if it held the secrets to the universe. He was embarrassed, yes, but he wasn't stopping her. "She sounds successful," I said, keeping my voice level. "Oh, immensely," Veronica gushed. "And single again. I hear her marriage to that investment banker didn't work out. It is a shame. But sometimes, people just need to find their way back to where they belong." The message was not subtle. It was a billboard with neon lights. "You are a placeholder. She is the destination." I realized then that the photo on the wall was not a memory. It was a vision board. They did not just miss Camille. They needed her. If the Kingsleys were in debt, and my research suggested they were bleeding cash, a union with the Waverly Auto Parts fortune would be a financial tourniquet, I was the obstacle standing in the way of their bailout. "Camille is intense," Ethan muttered. "She is capable," Veronica corrected. "Unlike some people who are content to just hike." Sloane snickered into her napkin. I took a bite of bread, chewing slowly. They were trying to make me feel small. They were trying to make me feel like a temporary glitch in their grand design. But they were making a mistake. They were showing me their hand. They were revealing exactly what they valued: money, status, and utility. They didn't care about Ethan's happiness. They cared about his portfolio. Suddenly, a voice cut through the tension like a gavel. "Natalie," it was Miles Hartman. He had been silent for the first 10 minutes of the meal, watching the exchange like a judge at a tennis match. Now, he leaned forward, his elbows on the table, ignoring etiquette. "You said your aunt's name was Marie," Miles said. His voice was low, devoid of the mocking tone the others used. "Marie Patterson." My heart hammered against my ribs, but I forced my hand to remain steady as I set down my spoon. This was the moment of danger. If he said, "The Marie Patterson who sold Northpac Logistics for $400 million in 2010, then my game was over. "Yes," I said, looking him in the eye. "Marie Patterson." The table went quiet. Veronica looked annoyed at the interruption. Sloane looked bored. But Miles looked like he had just solved a puzzle he had been working on for a decade. He stared at me, searching my face. He looked for the resemblance, the same sharp jawline I usually contoured away, the same steel in the eyes that I was currently masking with feigned innocence. He knew. I could see it in the way his pupils dilated slightly. He knew exactly who I was. He remembered the woman who had helped him when he was a young shark in the shipping lanes. I held my breath, waiting for the outing. Miles picked up his wine glass. He swirled the red liquid, watching the legs run down the side of the crystal. "I think I met a Marie Patterson once," he said slowly. "A long time ago, in Portland. She didn't travel much." I lied effortlessly. "She mostly stayed in her garden." Miles paused. He looked at Veronica, then at Gordon, and finally back at me. A strange look passed over his face. Amusement, respect, malice. "Must be a different woman," Miles said, taking a sip. "The woman I knew was formidable, not the type to raise a hiker." He set the glass down. He hadn't exposed me. He had tested me, and then he had covered for me. Why I didn't have time to analyze it because Veronica was already steering the conversation back to her favorite topic, my inadequacy. "Well," Veronica sighed, "it is nice that you have hobbies, Natalie, but you must understand, Ethan has responsibilities, big ones. He needs a partner who can help him carry that weight, not someone he has to carry." "I don't expect Ethan to carry me," I said softly. "Oh, honey," Veronica smiled, and it was the most vicious thing I had seen all night. "Look around you. This life, this house. It costs a fortune just to keep the lights on. Ethan needs a wife who brings something to the table, assets, connections, grace." She gestured vaguely at me with her fork. "You are sweet, really. But do you honestly think you fit in this picture with your freelance work and your leased apartment?" "It is not leased," I said. "I own my things." "Of course you do," Sloane laughed. "I bet you own a lovely collection of ceramic cats, too." Ethan finally cleared his throat. "Mom, Sloane, stop. Natalie is good for me. She grounds me." "Grounding is for electrical wires, Ethan," Gordon snapped, speaking up with sudden, surprising force. "You don't need grounding. You need capital." Silence descended on the table. Gordon seemed to realize he had said the quiet part out loud. He rubbed his temples, his hand shaking slightly. "I apologize," Gordon mumbled. "I have a headache." "It is the stress," Veronica said quickly, glaring at her husband, "which is why we need to focus on the future, the right future." She looked at me, and her eyes were cold. Hard stones. There was no confusion anymore. This dinner was not a welcome party. It was an appraisal. They were inspecting me like a used car, kicking the tires, checking the paint, and deciding that I wasn't worth the sticker price. They had already decided my value was zero. In fact, my value was negative. I was a liability. I was the cheap, naive girl occupying the space meant for the wealthy heiress who could save them from ruin. I looked at Ethan. He was avoiding my gaze, cutting his steak with unnecessary focus. He knew. He knew exactly what his parents were doing. He knew they were stripping me bare, insulting my dignity, and dismissing my worth, and he was letting it happen. Why? Because he was afraid of them, or because, deep down, he agreed. I took a bite of the steak. It was overcooked. "I understand," I said to Veronica, my voice steady. "You want what is best for Ethan." "We do," Veronica said, "and we usually get what we want." I smiled. It was a small, shy smile, the kind a poor girl gives when she is trying to be polite to her betters. But inside, I was memorizing the look on her face. "You want what is best for Ethan." I thought, "But you have no idea what is coming for you." I looked at Miles. He was watching me again, a faint smirk playing on his lips. He raised his glass to me in a silent toast. He knew I was lying. He knew I was a wolf in sheep's clothing, and for some reason, he was enjoying the show. The dinner continued, but the dynamic had shifted. I wasn't just a guest anymore. I was the enemy, and they were so busy looking at my cheap dress and mocking my simple answers that they didn't notice I was the one holding the knife. As the staff cleared the plates, I saw Veronica tap her phone screen. A message notification lit up Ethan's phone on the table a second later. He glanced at it, turned pale, and quickly flipped the phone face down. I didn't need to be a hacker to guess who the text was from, or who had orchestrated it. Camille, the game was rigorous. The rules were rigged. But as I finished my wine, I felt a calm satisfaction. They thought they were breaking me. They thought they were discarding me. They were wrong. They were just inviting me in. The transition from the dining room to the living room was executed with the precision of a military drill. Veronica Kingsley did not ask if we wanted tea. She announced it. "Coffee and tea in the drawing room," she said, rising from her chair. It was a command that allowed for no dissent. I watched as the staff silently cleared the debris of our interrogation, the half-eaten dessert, the empty wine glasses. My head was throbbing. A dull ache behind my eyes born from an hour of playing the submissive, wide-eyed simpleton. I needed a moment. I needed to drop the mask, even if just for 60 seconds, to breathe air that wasn't perfumed with judgment and old money. "If you will excuse me," I said, clutching my cheap clutch bag a little tighter. "I just need to use the powder room." "Down the hall. Second door on the left," Sloane said without looking at me. She was checking her reflection in a silver spoon. "Don't get lost. The house is a maze if you are not used to this kind of square footage." "I will try my best," I whispered. I slipped out of the dining room, the heavy oak doors closing behind me with a soft, final thud. The hallway was dimmer than the dining room, lit by sconces that cast long, distorted shadows against the silk wallpaper. The air here was cooler, carrying the scent of lemon polish and dust. I walked past the powder room. I kept walking. My shoes, chosen for their quiet, rubber soles, made no sound on the Persian runner rug. I was not looking for a bathroom. I was looking for the truth. During dinner, I had noticed Veronica and Sloane exchange a series of sharp glances, and immediately after the main course, they had both excused themselves for a quick call regarding the gala. They had not gone to the bathroom. They had gone to the study. I reached the end of the corridor where the library and the main office were located. The heavy double doors to the study were closed, but not latched. A sliver of golden light sliced through the darkness, spilling onto the floorboards. I stopped. I held my breath. The silence of the house was heavy, oppressive. But then, a voice cut through it. It was Veronica, but not the Veronica of the dinner table. Gone was the melodic, condescending lilt. In its place was a voice like jagged glass sharp, frantic, and ugly. "He is stalling. Sloane, I can see it in his face. He looks like he is about to vomit every time he looks at her. He needs to man up." Sloane's voice replied, bored and cold. "We don't have time for his moral crisis. Did you see the latest report from the auditors? We are bleeding out. Mother, the credit line from Chase is maxed. If the Waverly deal doesn't go through by the end of the quarter, we are insolvent." I pressed myself against the wall, the cold plaster seeping through the thin fabric of my dress. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird in a cage, but I forced my body to remain statuesque. "I know the numbers," Veronica snapped. "Why do you think I have been working on Camille for 6 months? She is ready. I saw the way she looked at him at the club last week. She wants him back. She just needs to see that he is available but currently occupied. It makes him a challenge." "So the girl is just bait," Sloane said. It wasn't a question. "She is a placeholder," Veronica corrected. "A shield. We need the Waverlys to sign the distribution contract. They won't sign if they think Ethan is a mess. They need to see a stable, engaged man, a man ready to settle down. It makes the banks relax. It makes the shareholders relax. And then, once the papers are signed and the first tranche of funding clears, the engagement ends," Veronica said. Her voice was terrifyingly practical, as if she were discussing how to prune a rosebush. "Ethan realizes they are incompatible. He realizes he rushed into it out of pity. He reconnects with his true love, Camille. The Waverlys are already financially locked in by then. They won't pull out over a breakup. It is perfect." I closed my eyes. It was worse than I thought. I wasn't just a diversion. I was a prop in a corporate merger. They were using my engagement to artificially inflate their stability rating so they could secure a deal that would save their crumbling empire. But what about the other thing? Sloane asked. The liability issue. That is the beauty of it, Veronica said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. We need someone to sign off on the new digital compliance protocols for the overseas accounts. You know the ones. The ones hiding the deficit, Sloane said flatly. The ones restructuring the debt, Veronica amended. If a Kingsley signs them, and the SEC investigates, we go to prison. But if the director of the new shell company signs them, we don't have a director for the shell company. We do now, Veronica said. Natalie? My blood ran cold. It wasn't just fear. It was a physical drop in temperature that started in my stomach and spread to my fingertips. Sloane laughed. She knits and hikes. Mother, she won't know what she is signing. Exactly, Veronica hissed. Ethan tells her it is just some formality for her to be added to the family trust or some insurance policy for the marriage. She signs. She becomes the legal officer for the subsidiary. If the debt structure collapses, it is her name on the documents. It is her negligence. We claim we were misled by an external party. She is poor, Sloane mused. She will be so dazzled by the idea of being part of the business she will sign anything. She probably thinks an NDA is a type of sandwich. She is perfect, Veronica said. She has no lawyers, no family money to fight us. Just a dead aunt and a cheap car. She is disposable, Sloane, and right now, we need to dispose of some risk. I stood there in the dark hallway, the words disposable and cheap echoing in my mind. I should have been devastated. A normal woman, a woman who actually was the poor, naive freelancer I was pretending to be, would have been on the floor weeping. She would have been heartbroken that the man she loved was part of a conspiracy to frame her for financial fraud. She would have run out the front door and never looked back, but I did not weep. I felt a strange, icy calm settle over me. It was the kind of focus I felt when I was analyzing a security breach at work. The moment the code reveals the intruder's pattern, the confusion vanished, the hurt vanished. All that was left was clarity. Ethan knew. He had to know. They were talking about him, stalling. He knew I was the lamb being led to the slaughter. He knew that tonight wasn't just about dinner. It was about setting me up to take the fall for millions of dollars in fraudulent debt. He was going to look me in the eye, propose to me, and then hand me a pen that would ruin my life. I stepped back from the door, moving with the silence of a ghost. I turned and walked back down the hallway, my movements mechanical but fluid. I reached the powder room, opened the door, and slipped inside, locking it behind me. I leaned over the sink, gripping the cold porcelain until my knuckles turned white. I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back at me looked frightened. Her eyes were wide, her skin pale. She looked like a victim. I reached up and tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of expensive lavender soap. You are not a victim, I whispered to my reflection. You are the director of security architecture. You destroy hackers for a living. These people are not predators. They are amateurs. They thought I was poor fine. I would be poor. They thought I was stupid, perfect. I would be an idiot. They thought I was alone. They had no idea who I had on speed dial. They wanted me to sign papers, I would sign them, but I would read them first, and I would make sure that when the trap snapped shut, I wasn't the one standing inside it. I splashed cold water on my face, carefully avoiding my mascara. I dried my skin with a linen towel that probably cost more than my dress. I practiced my smile in the mirror. It was a shy, grateful smile. The smile of a girl who couldn't believe her luck. Showtime, I murmured. I unlocked the door and walked back out into the hallway. I didn't creep this time. I walked with the slightly clumsy, hesitant gait of someone afraid to touch the walls. When I reached the living room, the drawing room, the scene had changed. The lighting had been dimmed. The harsh overhead lights were off, replaced by the soft, amber glow of floor lamps and the crackle of the fireplace. It was romantic. It was staged. Veronica and Sloane were seated on the sofa. Their postures relaxed, their faces masks of benevolence. They looked like kind, welcoming in-laws. Veronica was pouring tea from a silver pot. Sloane was actually smiling. And Ethan was standing in the center of the room, near the fireplace. He had his hands in his pockets, his shoulders hunched. He looked pale. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting for a gust of wind to decide his fate. When I walked in, he jerked his head up. His eyes met mine, and for a second, I saw the terror in them. He knew what was coming. He knew what he was about to do. "Natalie," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I am sorry I took so long," I said, stepping into the room, clutching my hands in front of me. The house is so big. I got turned around." "It is quite all right, my dear," Veronica cooed. "Come, sit. Ethan has been waiting for you." "Waiting?" I asked, blinking innocently. Ethan took a step toward me. He took his hands out of his pockets. His right hand was trembling. "Natalie," he said again. He looked at his mother. Veronica gave him a sharp, imperceptible nod, a direct order, "Do it." Ethan took a deep breath. He looked back at me. He didn't see the woman who had just overheard his family plotting to destroy her. He saw the mark. He saw the escape hatch. "There is something I want to ask you," he said, his voice gaining a false, rehearsed strength. "Something I have been thinking about for a long time." I stood still, letting him close the distance. I let my heart race, not with love, but with adrenaline. The trap was set, the bait was laid, and like a fool, he was about to step right into it. "Yes, Ethan," I whispered, my voice trembling with feigned anticipation. The room went silent. Sloane leaned forward, her eyes glittering with malice. Veronica watched with the satisfaction of a director watching the final act of a play she had written. Ethan went down on one knee. It was happening. The proposal. The lie. I looked down at him, at the man I had thought I loved. I looked at the top of his head, at his expensive suit, at the way he couldn't quite meet my eyes, even as he knelt before me. "Go ahead," I thought, a cold smile curling in the deepest, darkest corner of my mind. "Ask me, give me the ring, give me the weapon, because once that ring was on my finger, I wasn't just the girlfriend anymore. I was the fiancée. I was inside the circle, and from the inside, I could burn the whole house down." Ethan Kingsley was on one knee, and the air in the room seemed to vibrate with a frantic, desperate energy. It was the posture of romance, but the atmosphere was pure commerce. He fumbled with the velvet box, his hands shaking just enough to betray the fact that this was not a question of the heart, but a directive from headquarters. "Natalie," he began, his voice straining to find a register of sincerity that simply did not exist. "From the moment I met you, I knew." He popped the box open. I looked down. Inside nestled a diamond that was aggressively large. It was a rock the size of a quail egg, designed to be seen from across a crowded ballroom. To the untrained eye, the eye of a poor, naive girl from Oregon, it was a treasure. It was a promise of wealth and stability. But I did not have an untrained eye. I had an eye for detail. I saw the cloudiness in the center of the stone, the heavy inclusions that dulled its fire. I saw the setting, which was flashy but cast in 14-karat gold. Not 18 or platinum, it was a discount stone in a designer setting. It was the perfect metaphor for the Kingsley family, massive, imposing, and utterly lacking in clarity or value. "You make me want to be a better man," Ethan recited, his eyes flickering briefly to his mother, as if checking the teleprompter. "I want to build a life with you. Will you marry me?" The room suspended in silence. I could feel Veronica's gaze on the side of my face. It was physical, like a heat lamp. She was leaning forward, her lips slightly parted, her breath held. She wasn't waiting to see if her son would find happiness. She was waiting to see if the asset had been acquired. Beside her, Sloane was smirking, her eyes dancing with the cruel amusement of a hunter watching a rabbit hop into a snare. Time seemed to stretch. I had a choice. If I said no, I could walk out of here. I could get in my dented sedan, drive back to the city, and disappear. I could leave them to their bankruptcy and their lies, but if I walked away, they controlled the narrative. They would spin it. They would say I was unstable, or that I had tried to extort them. They would bring Camille back into the fold seamlessly, and Ethan would be safe, shielded by his mother's machinations, free to ruin someone else down the line. But if I said yes, I gained entry. A fiancé has rights. A fiancé is part of the inner circle. A fiancé signs documents. If I said yes, I would have a front row seat to their destruction. I would be the Trojan horse they had willingly wheeled through their own gates. I looked at Ethan. He looked nauseous. I looked at Veronica. She looked hungry. I let a single, perfectly timed tear slide down my cheek. I brought my hands to my mouth in a gesture of overwhelmed shock. "Yes," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Oh my God. Yes, Ethan." The tension in the room snapped like a dry twig. "Oh, thank heavens," Veronica cried out, clapping her hands together in a performance of maternal joy that was worthy of an award. Ethan let out a breath that sounded more like a deflation than a sigh of relief. He took my hand. His palm was clammy and slid the ring onto my finger. It was loose. Of course it was. They hadn't bothered to find out my ring size. "Welcome to the family, Natalie," Sloane said, standing up and walking over to inspect the ring. She didn't look at me. She looked at the stone. "It suits you, big, flashy. It will definitely distract people from other things." "It is beautiful," I said, gazing at the cloudy diamond as if it were the Hope Diamond. "I have never seen anything like it." "Well, you are a Kingsley now," Veronica said, sweeping in to plant a dry, airless kiss near my cheek. "You better get used to the best." The rest of the evening was a blur of champagne which I barely sipped and forced congratulations. Gordon Kingsley shook my hand with a grip that was limp and defeated. He looked at me with something approaching pity, but he said nothing. His silence was his complicity. By the time Ethan drove me home, the adrenaline was starting to curdle into a cold, hard resolve. We sat in his luxury SUV, the heated seats fighting the chill of the Illinois night. Ethan was gripping the steering wheel too tightly. "I am sorry about Mom," he said after 10 minutes of silence. "She can be a lot." The questions at dinner were intense. I turned to look at him. In the dashboard lights, he looked handsome and hollow. "She just loves you, Ethan," I said softly, playing my role. "She wants to make sure I am good enough for you. I understand that." "You are good enough," he said quickly. Too quickly. "You are great. Really. I want us to be happy." "We will be," I said. "We have the rest of our lives." He winced. It was a micro-expression, a tiny flinch at the concept of the rest of our lives, but I caught it. He didn't see a future with me. He saw a 6-month timeline, a signed contract, and a quiet annulment once the Waverly deal was signed. "I am tired," I lied. "Do you mind if we just go straight to my place?" "Yeah," he said, sounding relieved that I wasn't demanding a romantic detour. "Of course." He dropped me off at my apartment building, a modest brick structure in a neighborhood that was safe but decidedly unglamorous. He didn't come up. He kissed me on the forehead, promised to call me tomorrow, and drove away before I had even unlocked the lobby door. I watched his taillights fade. "Goodbye, Ethan," I murmured. Then I walked inside, took the elevator to the 4th floor, and entered my apartment. The moment the door closed, the posture of the shy, naive girl evaporated. I kicked off the cheap flats. I pulled the pins out of my hair. I walked over to the desk in the corner, my command center. My apartment was small, but the equipment on that desk was worth more than Ethan's car. 3 monitors, a secure server tower, and a dedicated fiber optic line. I sat down, the cheap engagement ring clinking against the keyboard. I twisted it around so the stone faced my palm. It was annoying to type with. "Let's see what you are hiding," I said to the empty room. I cracked my knuckles and began to work. I wasn't Natalie the freelancer tonight. I was the director of security architecture. I spent my days hunting vulnerabilities in banking systems, patching holes that hackers tried to exploit. Investigating a failing family business was like a professional athlete playing a game of catch with a toddler. I started with the public records, then moved to the gray area, the leaked databases, the vendor portals, the things you can find if you know exactly which digital rocks to turn over. The picture that emerged was not just bad, it was catastrophic. The Kingsley Group was a corpse that didn't know it was dead yet. Their liquidity was non-existent. They were shuffling money between accounts to cover payroll, playing a shell game with the banks. But then I found the centerpiece of their fraud. The project Veronica had mentioned, the tech initiative. It was called Project Aegis, on paper. It was a revolutionary platform for digitizing warranty claims for automotive parts. It promised to use blockchain to verify the authenticity of high-end car components, exactly the kind of business the Waverly family ran. I dug into the code repository they had set up for the investors to view. It was empty. Well, not empty. It was filled with copied code from open-source libraries. It was a facade, a Hollywood set. There was no algorithm. There was no blockchain. It was just a flashy interface designed to look functional during a demo. They were selling vaporware, and they needed a director to sign off on the compliance capability. They needed someone to legally attest that the software existed and worked. If I signed those papers, I wouldn't just be liable for a failed business. I would be committing federal securities fraud. I would be looking at 10 to 15 years in prison. "You evil witch," I whispered, thinking of Veronica's smile. But there was more. I shifted my focus to the personal finances. If the business was failing, surely the family was tightening its belt. No. I pulled up the credit card statements for the company accounts, the ones supposedly used for business development. Sloan Kingsley was a very expensive consultant. I found a series of recurring payments to a company called SK Strategic Solutions LLC, $5,000 here, $10,000 there, every month, for the past 3 years. I traced the LLC. It was registered in Delaware to an agent, but the mailing address forwarded to a P.O. box in Chicago. A P.O. box that was paid for by a personal credit card belonging to Sloan Kingsley. Sloan wasn't just watching the ship sink. She was looting the cargo hold while the passengers drowned. She was siphoning almost $250,000 a year out of the company while her father looked gray with stress and her mother plotted to frame an innocent woman. Does Veronica know, I wondered? Or is Sloan betraying her own mother? I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the monitors illuminating my face. The poor girl narrative was going to be my greatest weapon. They would never suspect that the girl in the polyester dress could trace a shell company through 3 layers of obfuscation in under an hour. I printed everything, the fake code reports, the bank statements, the proof of Sloan's embezzlement. I was organizing the stack of papers when my personal email chimed. It was a secure account, one I didn't use for Natalie the freelancer. I used it for industry contacts, for headhunters, for my real life. I frowned. It was 3 a.m. I clicked on the inbox. There was one new message. The sender was encrypted, a string of random characters. Subject, "The ring doesn't fit." My stomach dropped. I clicked open the email. The text was short, stark white against the dark background. "Dear Ms. Patterson, I saw you tonight. I saw the performance. It was impressive. Most people crumble under Veronica's gaze. But you absorbed it. I know you are not who you say you are. I know about Northbridge Ledger. I know about the patents. Do not sign the papers they give you on Thursday. The warranty project is a ghost. If you sign, you go to jail, and they walk away with the insurance payout. I am watching, and I am rooting for you. A friend." I stared at the screen, my breath catching in my throat. Someone new. My mind raced. Miles Hartman. He had recognized the name. He had covered for me at dinner. It had to be him. But why the anonymity? If he wanted to warn me, why not just say it at the table? Or was it someone else? Was it Camille? Was she playing a double game? Or was there someone else in that house, someone I hadn't noticed? Who saw through the disguise? I looked down at the ring on my finger. The cloudy diamond mocked me. I wasn't the only one setting traps. And now, I had a shadow. I typed a reply. My fingers flying. "Who are you?" I hit send. The response came back instantly. Automated. Address not found. Message undeliverable. I sat back, a cold smile touching my lips. Okay, I said softly. The game has a spectator. I closed the laptop. I didn't take off the ring. I would wear it. I would wear it like a badge of war. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. I had to play the happy bride-to-be. I had to let them think they had won. I had to let them hand me the pen, because you can't stab someone in the back until they are close enough to hug you. The next 3 weeks were a masterclass in endurance. If acting were a transferable skill, I would have been eligible for an Academy Award. I woke up every morning, put on my mask of the grateful, slightly overwhelmed fiancé, and stepped into the line of fire. The Kingsleys did not embrace me. They tolerated me. Like a mild allergic reaction they had decided to live with for the sake of the greater good. I was paraded around Lake Forest like a prize poodle, except the prize was for most likely to be discarded. We went to brunches at the country club where Veronica would loudly order for me, telling the waiter that I probably wasn't used to such rich food and would prefer the garden salad with dressing on the side. I sat there, nodding and smiling, while my internal monologue calculated the exact net worth of every person at the table, usually finding that their liquid assets were significantly lower than their egos. Sloane was a different kind of torture. She treated me like a fascinating anthropological experiment. So, she asked one afternoon while we were looking at floral arrangements for the upcoming party, does your family have a crest, or do you just write your name on your underwear so you don't lose it at the laundromat? I just use a marker, I said, widening my eyes innocently. It is permanent, Sloane laughed, a sound like ice cracking. Adorable, truly. You are so low maintenance. It must be nice not to have standards. I swallowed the insult with a sip of lukewarm tea. Ethan likes that I'm simple. Oh, I am sure he does, Sloane purred. Men always like simple things. They are easier to put in storage when you are done with them. Through it all, Ethan was performing his own role. He was the doting fiancé. He sent flowers to my apartment every other day, arrangements that were too large, too stiff, and clearly ordered by a personal assistant. He opened car doors. He held my hand in public with a grip that was sweaty and tense. He looked at me with eyes that were trying so hard to convey love that they ended up looking manic. But the cracks in his performance were visible if you knew where to look. It was the way he checked his watch when he thought I wasn't looking. It was the way he flinched when I touched his arm unexpectedly. And, most damning of all, it was the phone. Ethan guarded his phone like it contained the nuclear codes. He never left it on the table. He never let the battery drop below 50%. But one evening, while we were having a quiet dinner at a bistro in the city, a place chosen by me because it was affordable, he made a mistake. He went to the restroom and left the phone on the table. He thought it was safe because he had placed it face down. He didn't know that I had spent the last 10 years predicting user behavior. I waited until he was out of sight. Then, I didn't touch the phone. I simply watched. A notification buzzed. The screen lit up against the tablecloth. The reflection visible in the polished silver of the pepper shaker. It was a stretch, but I had excellent vision. Message from C. Preview. Just tell her you are busy tonight. I need you here. The silence is killing me. CWW. Camille Waverly. Ethan returned 2 minutes later. He looked flushed. He sat down, checked his phone immediately, and his face went rigid. Natalie, he said, his voice dropping into a fake, apologetic register. I am so sorry. Something has come up with the office. Dad needs me to review some contracts for the merger. I might have to cut this short. Oh, I said, letting my face fall. Is everything okay? Just work, he said, signaling for the check. You know how it is. Building our future. I understand, I said softly. Go. Don't worry about me. He practically ran out of the restaurant. He didn't know that I didn't go home. I waited 30 seconds, then walked out to my car. I knew he wasn't going to the office. The Kingsley Group offices were in the Loop. Ethan was heading north, toward the Gold Coast. I followed him. It was easy. He was driving aggressively, weaving through traffic. Too focused on his destination to check his rearview mirror, he pulled up to a high-rise building that screamed exclusivity. A doorman opened his door. I parked down the block and waited. 20 minutes later, they came out. Ethan and Camille. They didn't look like business partners. They looked like two people who were drowning and using each other for air. They stood on the sidewalk under the awning. Camille was wearing a trench coat, her blonde hair perfectly styled. She was gripping Ethan's lapels, looking up at him with an intensity that made my stomach turn. He wasn't pulling away. He was leaning in. He said something to her, and she laughed a genuine, throaty laugh that I had never heard from him. Then, he kissed her. It wasn't a peck. It was desperate. It was the kiss of a man who hated his life and was trying to escape it through someone else's mouth. I raised my camera. It was a compact DSLR with a high-speed shutter. Hidden in my purse, I snapped 5 frames in rapid succession. Clear. High definition. Undeniable. Got you, I whispered. I drove away before they separated. I didn't need to see more. I had the leverage. Now I needed the ally. 2 days later, I sat on a park bench near the Lincoln Park Zoo. It was a gray, windy Tuesday, the kind of weather that kept people indoors, perfect for a meeting that never happened. A figure approached from the north path. Miles Hartman wore a long wool coat and a hat pulled low. He looked like a character from a noir film, which felt appropriate given the circumstances. He sat down on the other end of the bench, leaving a polite 2 feet of space between us. He threw a handful of birdseed onto the pavement, and a flock of pigeons descended instantly. "You are playing a dangerous game, Ms. Patterson," Miles said without looking at me. "You are the one who sent the email," I replied, staring straight ahead at the lagoon. "You knew who I was at dinner. Why didn't you out me?" "Because I owe Marie Patterson a debt that money cannot pay," Miles said. His voice was gravelly and low. 30 years ago, when I was just starting out, I made a bad bet on a fleet of cargo ships. I was going to lose everything. Your aunt bought the debt. She gave me 5 years to pay it back with 0 interest. She saved my life. I felt a lump in my throat. Aunt Marie never talked about the people she helped. She just did it. "She was a good woman," I said. "She was a brilliant woman," Miles corrected. "And she raised a brilliant niece. I checked your credentials after the dinner. Director of Security Architecture? Impressive. Marie would be proud." "Why are you helping me?" "Miles, it can't just be nostalgia." He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. He threw more birdseed. "The Kingsleys and I go back a long way," he said. "Gordon and I were partners once, but 5 years ago, when they started the restructuring, they cut me out. They diluted my shares in the holding company without telling me. They stole about $2 million from me, legally speaking." "So you want revenge," I said. "I want justice," Miles said. "And I want to see Veronica's face when the house of cards falls. I have the files on their real estate holdings. They are leveraged at 110%. If the bank finds out about the double pledging on the Lake Forest property, they will foreclose immediately." "They are double pledging?" I asked, stunned. That was illegal on a level I hadn't even anticipated. "They are desperate," Miles said. "They are pledging the same assets to different lenders. It is a Ponzi scheme with bricks and mortar. I can give you the documentation, but you need to be the one to pull the trigger." "I am too old for the front lines." "I can do it," I said, "but I need time. They want me to sign something." "Project Aegis," Miles nodded. "The fake warranty platform. Do not sign it. Natalie, if you sign it, you become the fall guy." "I know," I said. "But if I refuse, they will cut me loose. They need a signature." "So give them one," Miles said, turning to look at me for the first time. His eyes were cold and sharp. "Just not the one they think." We spoke for another 10 minutes, coordinating our attack. When we parted ways, I felt lighter. I wasn't just a lone operator anymore. I had a partner, and I had a plan. The climax of their scheme arrived on a Thursday evening. 2 days before the engagement party, Veronica had decided to turn our engagement into the social event of the season. She had rented a massive tent for the lawn, hired a string quartet, and invited every major creditor, supplier, and society gossip in Illinois. The invitation list was a who's who of people the Kingsleys needed to impress. I was at my apartment when the buzzer rang. It was Ethan. He came up looking pale and jittery. He was carrying a leather portfolio. "Hey," he said, kissing me on the cheek. His lips were cold. "Can we talk?" "It is kind of important." "Of course," I said, leading him to the small sofa. "Do you want some water?" "You look like you have seen a ghost." "I am just stressed," he said, sitting down and placing the portfolio on the coffee table. "The party is going to be huge. Mom is going crazy. It will be wonderful," I said soothingly. "I am so excited to meet everyone." He looked at me, and for a second, I saw guilt, real, actual guilt, but he shoved it down. He had his orders. "Natalie," he said, opening the portfolio, "there is some paperwork we need to get out of the way before the party, just boring legal stuff." "Like a prenup?" I asked, teasingly. No, he said quickly. "Nothing like that. We trust each other. This is well. Mom and Dad want to give us a wedding present. They want to make you a director of one of the family subsidiaries. It is a tech company, since you know computers. They thought it would be a nice gesture. It comes with a stipend, $5,000 a month." He pushed the papers toward me. I looked down. The Aegis Initiative, appointment of director, acceptance of liability. The words swam on the page. It was a death warrant. It was a document that explicitly stated I had reviewed the code, verified the blockchain assets, and accepted full legal responsibility for the company's compliance. If I signed this, and the company was revealed to be a fraud, which it was, I would be the one explaining it to the FBI. Ethan, Veronica, and Sloan would be untouchable. "Wow," I said, letting my voice tremble with gratitude. "They want to make me a director, but I don't have any executive experience. Ethan." "It is just a title," Ethan said, his voice tight. "A formality. You don't actually have to do anything. The lawyers handle it all. We just need a signature to set up the bank account for your stipend." He uncapped a heavy, expensive pen and held it out to me. "Please," he said. "It would make Mom so happy. She wants you to feel included." I looked at the pen. I looked at his face. He was selling me out for a distribution deal with his ex-girlfriend. He was handing me a prison sentence and calling it a wedding gift. I reached out and took the pen. I felt the weight of it in my hand. I looked at the signature line. Natalie Patterson. I didn't sign. Not yet. I looked up at him and smiled a bright, beaming smile that reached my eyes. "Ethan," I said, "this is so generous. Of course I will sign. I would be honored to help the family." "Great," he exhaled, his shoulders sagging with relief. "That is great. Natalie, just sign right there." "But not on this coffee table," I said, closing the folder and pulling it toward me. "This is a big moment. Being made a director, we should do this properly." "What do you mean?" he asked, panic flaring in his eyes. "I want to read it over properly tonight." I lied. "I want to understand exactly what my new job is, so I can thank your parents correctly, and then let's sign it at the party." "The party?" Ethan choked. "Yes." I clapped my hands together. "It can be a surprise. I will sign it right before the toasts. It will show your mother how committed I am. Please, Ethan, let me have this one moment." He hesitated. He knew Veronica wanted it done now, but he also knew he couldn't push me too hard without looking suspicious. And he was weak. He always took the path of least resistance. "Okay," he said slowly. "Okay, at the party. But you promise you will sign?" "I promise," I said, clutching the folder to my chest. "I won't let you down." He left 10 minutes later, looking relieved but still anxious. As soon as the door closed, I threw the folder onto my desk. I picked up the phone and dialed Miles. "He gave me the papers," I said. "Did you sign?" Miles asked. "No," I said. "I kept them, and I convinced him to let me sign them at the engagement gala." "In front of everyone?" Miles asked. I could hear the smile in his voice. "In front of everyone," I said. The banks, the press, the Waverleys. I am going to turn their stage into a scaffold. Good girl, Miles said. I hung up. I looked at the folder one last time. The trap was set. The bait was taken. Now, all I had to do was wait for the curtain to rise. The gravel of the driveway crunched beneath the tires of my dented gray sedan. A sound that seemed aggressively loud against the backdrop of the string quartet playing softly in the distance. The Kingsley estate was lit up like a fortress preparing for a coronation. Floodlights bathed the stone facade in a golden glow, and a line of black limousines and luxury SUVs snaked its way toward the portico. I waited in line, my hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. I was not nervous. The time for nerves had passed. The butterflies in my stomach had died and been replaced by cold, hard stones. Tonight was not an engagement party. It was an execution, and I was the one holding the axe. When I finally pulled up to the entrance, the valet, a young man in a crisp red vest, hesitated. He looked at the rusted wheel well of my car, then at the lineup of Bentleys behind me, and finally made a decision. He walked to my window but didn't open the door. He leaned down, his face twisted in a polite grimace. "Miss," he said, tapping on the glass, "deliveries and staff parking are around the back. This is for guests only." I rolled down the window. The humid Illinois air rushed in, carrying the scent of expensive perfume and charcoal grills. "I am a guest," I said, my voice calm. I opened the door myself and stepped out. The valet took a step back, his mouth opening slightly. I wasn't wearing the clearance rack polyester dress tonight. I wasn't wearing the scuffed flats. I was wearing a floor-length gown of midnight blue silk crepe, cut on the bias so it flowed like liquid water over my frame. It was structured at the shoulder, severe and elegant, with a plunging back that revealed just enough skin to be dangerous. It was a dress that whispered money rather than shouted it. On my wrist, the cheap gold-plated bracelet was gone. In its place sat a vintage Patek Philippe watch, with a leather strap, a collector's piece worth more than the valet's college tuition. My hair was no longer in a messy bun. It was sleek, straight, and sharp enough to cut glass. I held out the keys to my terrible car. The keychain was a plastic lizard I had bought at a gas station. "Be careful with the transmission," I said, pressing the keys into his palm. "It sticks in second gear." He stared at me, then at the car, then back at me. "Yes, ma'am. I apologize." "Don't worry," I said, flashing him a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Just keep it close. I won't be staying long." I walked up the stone steps, the silk of my dress rustling softly. The heavy oak doors were open, and the foyer was packed with the elite of Lake Forest. I paused at the threshold. For the last 3 weeks, I had walked into this house with my shoulders hunched, my eyes downcast, playing the role of the mouse. Tonight, I stood at my full height. I lifted my chin. I took a breath, expanding my lungs, and stepped into the light. The conversation in the foyer didn't stop all at once, but it rippled into silence. People turned. They looked. They expected Ethan's charity case. They expected the girl in the cardigan. Instead, they saw a woman who looked like she owned the building. I saw the confusion in their eyes. I saw the whispers start behind raised champagne flutes. "Who is that? Is that the fiancé? I thought she was poor. Look at that dress." I moved through the crowd, not waiting for anyone to greet me. I saw Gordon Kingsley first. He was standing near the bar, nursing a scotch that looked dark enough to be paint thinner. He looked up as I approached, and the color drained from his face. He didn't look angry. He looked terrified. Gordon was a businessman, albeit a failing one. He knew how to read balance sheets, and he knew how to read people. For weeks, he had read me as a liability, a zero. Now, looking at the way I held myself, at the watch on my wrist, at the cold intelligence in my eyes, he realized he had made a miscalculation. "Natalie," he choked out. "Good evening, Gordon," I said. My voice was different, too. I dropped the soft, hesitant pitch I had been using. This was my boardroom voice, low, resonant, and commanding. "You look tired." I hope the stress of the party isn't too much. You look. He couldn't finish the sentence. He was staring at the watch. He knew what it was. I decided to dress up, I said simply. It is a special night, after all. Before he could respond, Veronica and Sloane descended upon us. Veronica was wearing gold. Naturally, she looked like a trophy that had been left out in the rain. Sloane was in red, aggressive and loud. Veronica froze when she saw me. Her smile, which had been plastered on for the benefit of a senator's wife, cracked. She scanned me from head to toe, her eyes narrowing as they searched for a loose thread, a stain, a sign of cheapness. She found nothing. "Natalie," Veronica said, her voice tight. "You look different." "I cleaned up," I said. Sloane stepped forward, sniffing the air as if trying to detect a scent of poverty. She looked at my dress, and I saw the flash of jealousy. It was undeniable. She knew fashion, and she knew she couldn't buy this off the rack at a department store. "Well," Sloane drawled, recovering her composure, "that is certainly an upgrade from the rags you usually wear. Is it a rental?" "There is a website for that. Isn't there Rent the Runway?" She said it loud enough for the nearby circle of guests to hear. A few people tittered nervously. I turned to her slowly. I didn't flush. I didn't look embarrassed. I looked at her with mild amusement. "Actually, Sloane," I said, my voice carrying clearly over the music. "It is a custom piece. My tailor in Milan has my measurements on file. He rushed it over for me. It is amazing what international shipping can do in 48 hours, isn't it?" The silence that followed was heavy. Sloane's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked like a fish on a dock. The idea that I had a tailor in Milan was so far outside her calculated reality of me that her brain simply short-circuited. "Milan," Veronica repeated, blinking rapidly. "But I thought you said you were on a budget." "I am," I said, taking a glass of champagne from a passing tray. "I am on a very strict budget. I only buy things that last." I turned away from them, leaving them standing there in their confusion. I wasn't done. I made my way into the main ballroom, where the crowd was thicker. I wasn't looking for Ethan. I was looking for the money. I spotted a group of men in gray suits standing near the orchestra. I recognized one of them from my research, Arthur Sterling, the senior risk officer for the bank holding the majority of the Kingsley's debt. He looked bored, checking his phone while his colleagues discussed golf. I walked straight up to him. "Mr. Sterling," I said. He looked up, surprised. "Yes." "Natalie Patterson," I said, extending my hand. "I don't think we have been introduced, but I have read your white paper on algorithmic risk assessment in mid-cap lending. The section on liquidity traps was fascinating." He took my hand, looking utterly baffled. "I thank you. You are the fiancé." "I am," I said. "For tonight," he frowned, not catching the implication. "I must say, Ms. Patterson, I was under the impression you were in the arts." "I am in security architecture," I corrected him smoothly. "I specialize in digital compliance and fraud detection for fintech. Actually, I wanted to ask you about your bank's exposure to unsecured tech derivatives. Given the current market volatility, are you tightening your lending criteria for legacy family firms?" The other men in the circle stopped talking about golf. They stared at me. I wasn't speaking the language of a poor freelancer. I was speaking the language of a director. "We are always cautious," Sterling said, his eyes narrowing with interest. "But wait, did you say fraud detection?" "It is a hobby," I said lightly. "You know how it is. You start looking at a data set, and sometimes the numbers just don't add up. The assets are listed twice. The revenue is projected rather than realized. It is a house of cards." I held his gaze for a second longer than necessary. Sterling went still. He was smart. He heard the warning. He looked across the room at Gordon Kingsley, who was wiping sweat from his forehead. Then he looked back at me. "Perhaps we should talk more, Ms. Patterson." Sterling said quietly, "We will." I promised. Later, I moved on. I worked the room like a politician. I dropped hints. I made sharp observations. I let the guests see a woman who was formidable, intelligent, and wealthy. Is it true you are Marie Patterson's niece? A woman in pearls asked me near the buffet. The shipping magnate. She was my aunt. Yes, I said, lowering my voice to a conspiratorial whisper. She taught me everything I know, especially about spotting a bad deal. The rumor mill ignited. I could practically see the flames spreading. She is a Patterson. She has money. She is not a charity case. The narrative the Kingsleys had built that they were saving me was crumbling in real time. Now, the question wasn't why Ethan was marrying me. The question was, what did I want with them? I felt a hand on my elbow, hard. I turned to see Ethan. He looked frantic. His tie was crooked, and there was a sheen of sweat on his upper lip. Natalie, he hissed. What are you doing? Mom is freaking out. She says you are talking to the bankers. She says you told Sloane you have a tailor in Italy. What is going on? I looked down at his hand on my arm until he let go. I am mingling, Ethan, I said innocently. Isn't that what a good fiancé does? I am charming your guests. You are not charming them. You are confusing them, he whispered. You are supposed to be, low profile. And where did you get that dress? You told me you were wearing the pink one from the outlet mall. I changed my mind, I said. Do you like it? It doesn't matter if I like it, he snapped, then lowered his voice as a guest walked by. Look, we need to stick to the plan. The toast is in 20 minutes. Do you have the papers? The directorship papers? I have them, I said, patting my clutch. Safe and sound. Good, he exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Okay, just tone it down. Okay, can we go somewhere private? I need to talk to you before the speeches. Just for a second. I looked at him. He wanted to get me alone. He wanted to reassure himself that he still had control, that I was still his puppet. No, I said. He blinked. What? No, I repeated, smiling radiantly at a passing waiter. I don't think so. Ethan, the party is in full swing. I don't want to miss a minute of it. Besides, tonight is about us, isn't it? It is about the truth coming out. Natalie, please, he begged. Go find your mother. Ethan, I said coldly. She looks like she needs a drink. I turned my back on him. It was the first time I had ever openly defied him. I felt the shock radiating off him, but I didn't care. I scanned the room again, and then I saw her, Camille Waverly. She was standing near the French doors leading to the terrace. She looked magnificent in silver, a stark contrast to my dark blue. She was holding a martini glass, and she wasn't looking at Ethan, she was looking at me. Her expression wasn't one of jealousy, it was confusion. She had been promised a mouse. She was looking at a viper. She walked toward me, the crowd parting for her. This was the other woman, the co-conspirator, the woman who thought she could steal my dignity and my future because she had a bigger bank account. We met in the center of the room, under the massive crystal chandelier. Natalie, Camille said. Her voice was cool, but there was an edge to it. You look expensive. Camille, I replied. You look like you are waiting for something. I am waiting for the announcement, she said, taking a sip of her drink. Ethan says you are signing on to the family business tonight. That is very brave of you. Brave, I asked. Or stupid? She smiled. A cruel, thin thing. There is a fine line, isn't there? But don't worry, I am sure they will take good care of you. Once you sign, you are permanent. She didn't mean permanent in a good way. She meant trapped. She meant I would be the permanent scapegoat. I hear you and Ethan have been spending a lot of time together, I said, keeping my voice light. Catching up on old times. Camille's eyes flickered. We are old friends. We have history, something you wouldn't understand. History is interesting, I said. It is funny how it has a way of repeating itself, or getting documented. I saw a flash of worry in her eyes. What does that mean? It means, I said, leaning in close so only she could hear, that I hope you are photogenic, Camille, because tonight is going to be very memorable. I stepped back just as the music swelled. The string quartet stopped playing. A hush fell over the room. Veronica Kingsley was tapping a spoon against her champagne glass. She stood on a small raised platform at the front of the room, a microphone in her hand. She looked regained, composed, the mask of the matriarch firmly back in place. "Ladies and gentlemen," Veronica announced, her voice booming through the speakers, "if I could have everyone's attention, please, we have a very special announcement to make." The crowd turned toward the stage. Ethan was walking up to join his mother. He looked pale. He looked at me, pleading silently for me to play my part. I clutched my bag. Inside were the papers. Inside was the evidence. I didn't walk toward the stage. Not yet. I waited. The trap was about to snap shut, and for the first time in weeks, I wasn't the one afraid of the noise it would make. The transition from the center of the ballroom to the secluded alcove near the terrace doors was swift and aggressive. Veronica Kingsley did not guide me. She corralled me. Her hand was clamped around my upper arm with a grip strength that belied her slender frame, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the silk of my dress. We were moving away from the eyes of the bankers and the gossips, into the shadows where the family business was truly conducted. She spun me around as soon as we were behind a large potted palm, effectively blocking me from the view of the main floor. Her face, which had been a mask of benevolent matriarchy only seconds ago, was now contorted with a fury so raw it was almost ugly. "What game are you playing?" Veronica hissed, her voice a low, vibrating chord of rage. "You walk in here looking like this. You talk to Arthur Sterling about derivatives. You humiliate Sloane. What is this costume?" "Natalie." I gently removed her hand from my arm. I did not yank it away. I peeled her fingers off one by one, as if I were removing a piece of lint from my sleeve. I smoothed the midnight blue silk, taking a moment to inspect the fabric before meeting her gaze. "I am not playing a game, Veronica," I said, my voice calm and leveled. "I am just being myself, for the first time since we met." "Yourself." She laughed. A short, sharp sound like a bark. "You are a broke freelancer from Oregon who drives a car that belongs in a junkyard. That is who you are. This—" She gestured wildly at my gown and the vintage Patek Philippe on my wrist. "This is a fraud. You are trying to embarrass us. You are trying to make us look foolish by playing dress-up." "I never said I was poor," I replied, holding her eyes. "I never once told you I was struggling. I never asked for money. I never asked for help." "You let us believe it," she snapped. "No," I corrected her, stepping a fraction of an inch closer, invading her personal space. "Ethan assumed it. He saw a woman in comfortable clothes and a practical car, and he decided she was beneath him. He saw what he wanted to see: someone weak, someone manageable. And you saw a victim. You didn't bother to ask for a bank statement. Veronica, you just checked my shoes." Veronica's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She was processing the shift in power. She was used to being the tallest building in the skyline, and suddenly, she was realizing she was standing in a crater. "You lied by omission," she spat finally. "You manipulated us." "That is a rich accusation coming from you," I said softly, before she could respond. Sloane appeared at her shoulder. She looked flushed, her red dress clashing violently with the pallor of her anger. She had clearly recovered from the shock of my Milan Taylor comment and was now in attack mode. "I don't know who you think you are," Sloane said, stepping up to flank her mother, "but I am going to find out. I am texting my contact at the credit bureau right now. We are going to run a full background check on you. Real estate, assets, criminal record, everything." She held up her phone as a threat. I smiled at her. It was a genuine smile. "I encourage you to do that. Sloane, please, run the check. Look up Natalie Patterson. Look up the patents. Look up the Northbridge Ledger equity split from 2021. You might find the results illuminating." Sloane faltered. She had expected me to panic. She had expected the fear of exposure. Instead, I was handing her the flashlight. "You are bluffing," Sloane muttered. though her thumb hovered uncertainly over her screen. Am I asked, or are you just terrified that you have spent the last month underestimating the only person in this room who can actually do math? Natalie. Ethan burst into the alcove, nearly tripping over the hem of a curtain. He looked like a man who was watching his life dissolve. His tie was askew, and his eyes were darting back and forth between me and his mother. Please, Ethan begged, his voice a hoarse whisper. People are looking. The Waverleys are staring. Can we just lower the volume? We have to do the speeches. Your fiancé has gone rogue. Ethan, Veronica said, not taking her eyes off me. She is a liar. I am not the one lying to the investors. Mother, I said, letting the words hang in the air like smoke. Ethan flinched. He reached out, trying to take my hand, but I stepped back. Natalie, stop, he pleaded. Just stop. We can talk about this later. Tonight is important. The directorship, the papers. You promised you would sign. I looked at him. He was pathetic. He was standing there, caught between the two women who owned him, trying to salvage a deal that was already dead. He didn't care about the truth. He just wanted the signature. He wanted the shield. Yes, I said. The papers. I opened my clutch. I didn't pull out the entire folder. I pulled out a single sheet of paper, a photocopy I had made of the liability clause. I had highlighted the relevant section in neon yellow. I had a question about this. Ethan, I said, holding the paper up. Not now, he hissed. No, right now, I insisted. It is just a small detail. Section 4, paragraph B. The appointed director assumes full personal and criminal liability for all compliance reporting regarding the technological assets of the subsidiary. I read the words slowly, enunciating every syllable. It is standard legal text, Veronica dismissed, waving her hand. Boilerplate? Is it? I asked, because I had a friend look at it, a lawyer. He said this clause is unusually specific. He said it effectively transfers the responsibility for fraud from the shareholders that would be you three to the director. That would be me. I looked at Ethan. Is the technology real? Ethan, does the code exist? Ethan turned the color of ash. He opened his mouth, closed it, and looked at the floor. Of course it exists, Sloane snapped. How dare you? Then why is the repository empty? I asked, my voice cutting through her bluster. I checked the server logs. Sloane, there is nothing there. Just a front-end interface and a lot of empty promises. The silence in the alcove was absolute. The sounds of the party, the laughter, the clinking glasses felt a million miles away. You hacked us, Veronica whispered, horror dawning on her face. I audited you, I corrected. There is a difference. What is going on here? Gordon Kingsley had stepped into the circle. He held a fresh glass of scotch, his hand shaking so badly the ice was rattling against the crystal. He looked from Veronica to Ethan, and then his eyes landed on the paper in my hand. What is that? Gordon asked. It is the liability waiver. Gordon, I said, handing him the sheet. The one they want me to sign. They are setting up a shell company for the fake warranty project, and they want me to be the face of it. When the bank realizes the collateral is fake, I go to prison, and the family keeps the initial loan disbursement. Gordon took the paper. He read the highlighted text. He didn't look surprised by the fraud. He knew the business was failing, but he looked at the specific wording. The cold, legal mechanism designed to destroy a human life to save a bank account. He looked up at his wife. Veronica, Gordon said, his voice trembling. You said we were just using her credit rating. You didn't say we were giving her the prison time. She is a nobody. Gordon, Veronica hissed, abandoning all pretense. She has no family, no connections. Who is going to miss her if someone has to take the fall? Better her than Ethan, better her than us. Gordon looked at me. For the first time, I saw the full weight of his shame. He wasn't a monster. He was a weak man who had let monsters run his house. But even a weak man has a breaking point. She is not a nobody, Gordon whispered. She is a person. She is a problem, Sloane shouted, losing her composure entirely. And she needs to fix this. Sign the paper, Natalie, or I swear to God. Or what? I asked, turning to Sloane with a look of pure steel. You will ruin me with what money? Sloane. The money you stole from your father's company through your fake consulting firm. Sloane went white. Gordon's head snapped toward his daughter. What? Gordon breathed. SK Strategic Solutions, LLC. I recited. $240,000 in the last 12 months, diverted from the operating budget to a private account in your name, while your father was refinancing the house to pay payroll. Gordon stared at his daughter. The betrayal was total. The family unit was dissolving before my eyes, eaten alive by its own greed. That is a lie, Sloane squeaked, her voice an octave higher than usual. It is in the bank records, I said. I have copies of those, too. Before the implosion could go any further, a shadow fell over us. It was Miles Hartman. He moved with the silent grace of a predator who had already cornered his prey. Excuse me, Miles said, his voice smooth and polite. I hate to interrupt a family moment. Veronica spun around, trying to compose her face, but it was too late. The mask was shattered. Miles, she choked out. We are just discussing the timeline. Excellent, Miles said. He didn't look at Veronica. He looked at me. Natalie, there is a gentleman named Mr. Sterling near the stage. He is very eager to hear what you have to say. He told me that if the directorship is announced, the bank will need to have a very long conversation with you immediately following the speeches. It was the signal. The trap was primed. The bank was watching. Thank you, Miles, I said. Suddenly, the music cut out completely. A spotlight swept across the room. Searching, the master of ceremonies, a man with a booming baritone voice, spoke into the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, if we could please welcome the woman of the hour, the future Mrs. Ethan Kingsley, Miss Natalie Patterson. The spotlight hit the alcove. It blinded us for a second. We were exposed. The guests cheered politely, unaware that they were applauding a crime scene. Veronica looked at the light, then at me. She was trapped. If she stopped me now, it would cause a scene. If she let me go up there, she risked everything. But arrogance is a hard habit to break. She still believed she could control the narrative. She still believed that once I was on stage, the pressure of the crowd would force me to submit. She thought I would be too polite to ruin the night. She forced a smile onto her face. It was a gruesome, skeletal thing. Go on then, Veronica said, reaching into her purse and pulling out a wireless microphone she had been holding for the QA session. She shoved it into my hand. Go say your few words. Keep it short. Keep it sweet. And remember who you are dealing with. I took the microphone. It was heavy. It felt like a gavel. I will remember, I said. I looked at Ethan. He was shaking his head slightly. A silent beg. Don't do it. I looked at Gordon. He had turned away, unable to watch. I looked at Sloane, who was trembling with rage and fear. And then I turned and walked out of the alcove. I walked into the spotlight. The beam of light followed me as I moved through the crowd, the silk of my dress flowing around me like armor. The applause grew louder. I saw the faces of the guests curious, envious, judgmental. I stepped up onto the low stage. I stood next to the string quartet, who had gone silent. I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw Arthur Sterling near the front, his arms crossed, waiting. I saw Camille Waverly, her martini glass halfway to her mouth. Her eyes narrowed. I saw Miles Hartman raising a glass in the back. I gripped the microphone. I didn't tremble. Veronica thought she had handed me a tool to surrender. She was wrong. She had handed me the trigger. Good evening, everyone, I said, my voice ringing out clear and strong over the speakers. The room went silent. Thank you all for coming, I continued. The Kingsley family has been very eager for me to speak tonight. They have been very eager for me to sign my name to their legacy, and I think it is time we gave them exactly what they asked for. I smiled. It was the sharpest thing in the room. But first, I said, there is a story I need to tell you. A story about a poor girl, a rich family, and a very expensive mistake. I saw Veronica step forward from the shadows, her eyes wide with panic. She started to gesture to the sound technician to cut the mic, but it was too late. I had the floor, and I wasn't giving it back. I want to start by thanking the Kingsley family for this incredibly elaborate evening, I began, my voice smooth and warm, echoing slightly against the vaulted ceiling of the ballroom. It is truly a night that none of us will ever forget. The crowd smiled. A few people clapped politely. Veronica, standing in the shadows to the left of the stage, visibly relaxed, her shoulders dropped an inch. She thought she had won. She thought I was doing exactly what I had been trained to do, play the grateful, overwhelmed girl who couldn't believe her luck. She thought I was smoothing over the cracks I had exposed in the alcove, pasting a veneer of civility over the rotting foundation of her family. When I first came to this house, I continued, pacing slowly across the stage, letting my silk dress catch the light. I was nervous. I drove up in my old sedan, wearing the simple clothes I felt comfortable in, and I remember the very first thing Veronica said when she saw me standing at the door. I paused. I looked directly at Veronica. Her smile faltered. She asked if the agency had sent the maid to the wrong entrance. A ripple of uncomfortable laughter moved through the room. Some thought it was a joke, a self-deprecating anecdote. Others, the ones who knew Veronica well, went silent. It was an honest mistake, I said, my tone darkening just a fraction. Because in the world of the Kingsleys, value is determined by the label on your dress and the shine of your jewelry. If you don't look the part, you are invisible, or worse, you are a servant. Natalie. Ethan stepped forward from the side of the stage, his voice tight. That is enough. We get it. I ignored him. I turned back to the audience. But I learned quickly. I learned that my role in this family wasn't just to be a wife, it was to be a comparison, a baseline. I was brought here to show everyone what unworthy looked like, so that the worthy option would shine even brighter. I gestured to the wall where the photo of Ethan and Camille hung. Camille Waverly, I said. The gold standard, the woman who should be standing here, the woman with the pedigree, the connections, and the auto parts fortune that could single-handedly refinance a failing legacy. The room was deadly quiet now. The bankers were no longer checking their phones. The socialites had lowered their glasses. I used to wonder why, I said, dropping the warmth entirely. My voice became a blade. Why propose to the poor girl if you love the rich one? Why bring me into this home if you despise everything I represent? I thought maybe, just maybe, it was love, but love doesn't act like this, doesn't calculate. I walked to the edge of the stage, looking down at the front row where Arthur Sterling sat. 3 weeks ago, after a lovely dinner where I was mocked for my hobbies and my background, I walked down the hallway of this house. The door to the study was open, and I heard a conversation. Veronica took a step forward, her face draining of blood. She raised a hand, as if to physically grab the words out of the air. Natalie, stop this immediately. I heard a plan. I spoke over her, my voice rising with authority. I heard a mother tell her daughter that the engagement was a strategic maneuver, a temporary measure, a human shield. The gasps were audible now, real shock, not polite surprise. The plan was simple, I explained, dissecting their conspiracy with clinical precision. Ethan would marry the poor, naive girl to look stable for the banks. He would secure the distribution deal with the Waverleys, proving he was a settled man. And once the ink was dry, once the funds were transferred, a scandal would be manufactured. The poor girl would be discarded, and Ethan would tragically, reluctantly, find comfort in the arms of his true love, Camille. Liar, Sloane shrieked from the side. She is lying. She is delusional. Am I? I asked. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a small remote control. I pointed it at the large projection screen behind me, which had been set up to display a montage of happy couple photos. I clicked the button. The image on the screen changed. It wasn't a photo of me and Ethan holding hands in a meadow. It was a high-resolution photograph of Ethan and Camille standing outside the apartment building on the Gold Coast. It was the moment of the kiss. Ethan's face was contorted with desperation, his hands gripping Camille as if she were a life raft. The timestamp in the corner of the photo was from 3 days ago. "This was taken Tuesday," I said calmly. While Ethan told me he was reviewing contracts with his father, Ethan lunged for the stage. "Turn it off! Turn it off! Right now!" He scrambled up the steps, his face wild with panic. He reached for the microphone in my hand, but he froze. He froze because 500 eyes were pinned to him. He froze because the silence of the room was so heavy it felt like physical pressure. He looked out at the crowd, at the investors, at the neighbors, at the people whose approval he craved like oxygen, and he saw their disgust. He saw that grabbing the microphone wouldn't stop the truth. It would only confirm his violence. He stopped 3 feet away from me, panting, his hands shaking. "You are ruining everything," he whispered, his voice cracking like a child's. "I am saving myself," I replied. I turned back to the crowd. "But the infidelity is the least of it. Cheating is a moral failure. What came next is a legal one." I clicked the remote again. The screen changed. The photo of the kiss disappeared, replaced by a scanned document. It was the signature page of the Aegis Initiative Directorship Agreement. The text was blown up, crisp and undeniable. "This is the document Ethan handed me tonight," I said. "He told me it was a wedding gift, a title, a stipend, a way to welcome me into the business." I pointed a laser pointer at the screen, the red dot dancing over the highlighted paragraph. "Section 4, Paragraph B," I read aloud. "The director assumes full personal and criminal liability for the compliance of the underlying technological assets." I looked at Arthur Sterling. He was standing now. He was putting on his glasses, squinting at the screen. "Mr. Sterling," I said, "you know what the Aegis Initiative is. It is the collateral for the bridge loan your bank is currently underwriting. It is supposed to be a revolutionary blockchain warranty system." I paused for effect. "It doesn't exist." A murmur of confusion and outrage swept through the room. "The code repository is empty," I declared. "The tech is a ghost. It is a shell company designed to inflate the Kingsley portfolio to secure a loan they cannot pay back. And this document, this gift, it was a trap to transfer the prison sentence for securities fraud onto me, the poor, stupid girl who wouldn't read the fine print." "That is slander," Veronica screamed. She was clawing her way toward the stage now, her composure completely gone. She looked like a banshee in gold lame. "Security, get her off the stage. She is mentally unstable." "I am not unstable, Veronica," I said. "I am the director of security architecture for Northbridge Ledger. I audit systems for a living, and your system is broken." Suddenly, a voice cut through the chaos from the floor. "She is telling the truth." The crowd parted. Camille Waverly stepped forward. She didn't look at Ethan. She didn't look at Veronica. She looked at the bankers. "My family never agreed to the distribution deal," Camille said, her voice clear and cold. "We entered due diligence 6 months ago. We pulled out 3 weeks later. The Kingsley numbers didn't add up. We saw the debt. We saw the leverage." Ethan stared at her, betrayed. "Camille." "But you said—" "I said I would listen, Ethan," Camille said, looking at him with utter contempt. "I never said I would buy. You were useful to keep my name in the press, to make my ex-husband jealous. But marry you, bail out this sinking ship, I would rather burn my money." Ethan looked as if he had been shot. The true love narrative, the safety net, the backup plan, it all evaporated in a single sentence. He wasn't the prize. He was the pawn. Veronica stood frozen near the stairs, her mouth opening and closing. She had lost control of the room, lost control of the deal, and lost control of her son. But I wasn't finished. I had one more knife to twist. A knife that would ensure the Kingsley family didn't just fall, but turned on each other in the wreckage. I walked to the very edge of the stage. I looked directly at Sloane, who was trying to hide behind a pillar. "There is one last thing," I said, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial volume that the microphone picked up perfectly. "Mr. Kingsley Gordon." Gordon looked up from the floor. He looked like a man who was ready to die. "You have been killing yourself to keep this company afloat," I said to him, not unkindly. "You have refinanced this house. You have taken out personal loans. You have begged partners for extensions. You thought the hole in the budget was due to market conditions. You thought it was bad luck." I clicked the remote one last time. A spreadsheet appeared on the screen. It was a bank statement. "It wasn't bad luck," I said. "It was theft." I pointed to the highlighted rows. "SK Strategic Solutions, LLC," I read. "A consulting firm that has billed the Kingsley Group for $240,000 in the last 12 months for strategic advisory services." The crowd whispered. $240,000 wasn't a fortune to some people in this room, but for a company on the brink of insolvency, it was a hemorrhage. "I traced the LLC," I said. "It doesn't have an office. It doesn't have employees. It has a PEO box in Chicago. And the registered agent is—" I looked at Sloane. "Sloane Kingsley." Gordon slowly turned his head. He looked at his daughter, the daughter who had mocked my cheap shoes, the daughter who had called me a leech, the daughter who had pushed hardest for me to sign the liability waiver so the loan money would keep flowing. "Sloane," Gordon whispered. It was a sound of pure heartbreak. "It is not what it looks like," Sloane yelled, her voice shrill and guilty. "I was managing expenses. I was protecting assets." "You were looting the company," I said. "You saw the ship going down, and instead of grabbing a bucket, you started stripping the copper wire from the walls. You stole from your father while he was drowning." The room erupted. It wasn't polite anymore. It was a riot of accusation and shock. The bankers were on their phones, calling legal teams. The suppliers were shouting at Gordon. Veronica was screaming at Sloane. Ethan was sitting on the steps of the stage, his head in his hands, weeping. I stood in the center of the storm. I felt calm. I felt clean. I looked down at the ring on my finger, the cloudy diamond, the symbol of their arrogance. I pulled it off. It slid easily over my knuckle. I walked over to the edge of the stage where Veronica stood, trembling with rage and ruin. "I believe this belongs to you," I said. I dropped the ring. It hit the floor with a dull, insignificant sound. It bounced once and rolled under a table. "I won't be needing it," I said into the microphone. "I have my own assets." I turned off the microphone. I placed it gently on the stand, and then I walked down the stairs. The crowd parted from me like the Red Sea. They didn't look at me with pity anymore. They looked at me with fear and awe. I wasn't the poor girl. I wasn't the victim. I was the one who had brought the house down. The ballroom was no longer a place of celebration. It was a crime scene, and the evidence was plastered 10 feet high on the projection screen behind me. Sloane was the first to break the stunned silence. She didn't cry. She didn't faint. She attacked. It was the reaction of a cornered animal that knew its throat was about to be exposed. "This is fake," Sloane screamed, her voice shredding the sophisticated atmosphere. She pointed a trembling finger at the spreadsheet glowing on the screen. "That is a fabrication. She photoshopped it. She is a hacker. Remember, she made it all up to humiliate me because she is jealous." She looked around the room, her eyes wild, begging for someone, anyone, to believe her. "Daddy," she yelled, turning to Gordon. Tell them she is lying. I have been working myself to death for this company." Veronica was right behind her. Recovering her voice, she marched toward the base of the stage, her face a mask of venom. "You have made a grave mistake, you little brat," Veronica hissed, loud enough for the first 3 rows to hear. "I will sue you for defamation. I will sue you for corporate espionage. I will take every penny you think you have, and I will leave you rotting in a cell. You think you can walk into my house and do this?" Ethan was pulling at the sleeve of my dress, his touch clammy and desperate. "Natalie, please," he whimpered. "Let's just go. Let's go to the house. We can talk about this. Mom is just upset. We can fix this. Just tell them it was a joke. Please, Natalie, you are scaring me. I looked down at him. He looked like a child who had broken a vase and was trying to glue it back together before his parents noticed. But the vase wasn't broken. It was pulverized. I am not going anywhere, Ethan, I said, my voice calm against their hysteria. And I am certainly not going back to that house. You are a liar, Sloane shrieked again, grabbing a champagne glass from a passing waiter and hurling it at the screen. It shattered against the fabric, sending shards of glass raining down onto the stage. It is all lies. It is not a lie, Sloane. The voice came from the back of the room. It was deep, resonant, and carried the weight of absolute authority. Miles Hartman walked forward. He was holding a thick manila folder. He didn't look at Sloane. He walked straight to Gordon Kingsley, who was standing frozen in the center of the room, staring at the screen like a man watching his own autopsy. Gordon, Miles said gently. Gordon looked at his old friend. His eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. Miles. I tried to tell you, Miles said. I tried to warn you 6 months ago that the liquidity ratios were off. You didn't listen. You trusted family. Miles opened the folder. He pulled out a stack of physical checks. They weren't digital copies. They were the original canceled checks, retrieved from the bank archives. These are the withdrawals. Gordon, Miles said, handing the stack to him. Authorized by Sloane Kingsley, endorsed by Sloane Kingsley, deposited into an account at First City Bank under the name SK Solutions. I pulled the favors myself to get these this morning. Gordon took the checks. His hands shook so violently that the papers rattled like dry leaves in a windstorm. He flipped through them. 1, 2, 10, 50. He saw the dates. He saw the amounts. $5,000, $12,000. He looked up at his daughter. Sloane stopped screaming. She went deadly pale. She knew that Miles Hartman didn't bluff. You bought a boat, Gordon whispered. His voice was broken. Last July. You told me your boyfriend bought it. You bought it with the payroll money. I deserved a bonus, Sloane snapped, her defense crumbling into petulant entitlement. I was the only one trying to keep up appearances. Do you know how much it costs to look like we are still relevant? Dad. I did it for us. You did it for yourself, Gordon said, the paper crushing in his fist. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. The socialites were texting. The reporters were recording. But the real danger wasn't the gossip. It was the man in the gray suit standing near the front. Arthur Sterling, the representative from the bank, stepped into the circle. He didn't look angry. He looked professional, which was much worse. He looked like a man who was about to foreclose on a life. Mr. Kingsley, Sterling said. Mrs. Kingsley. Veronica whipped around. Arthur, please. This is a misunderstanding, a domestic dispute. We will sort this out internally. I am afraid that is no longer possible. Veronica, Sterling said. He adjusted his glasses. Given the revelations regarding the non-existence of the collateral for the Aegis loan, and now this evidence of internal embezzlement, the bank is invoking the material adverse change clause effective immediately. What does that mean? Ethan asked, his voice trembling. It means we are freezing the credit line, Sterling said simply, and we will be calling in the outstanding principal on the bridge loan. You have 48 hours to present a solvent balance sheet, or we will begin asset seizure proceedings. You can't do that, Veronica screamed. We have a deal with the Waverleys. Camille is right here. She will vouch for us. She spun around, searching the crowd for her lifeline. Camille, tell him. Camille Waverley stood by the exit, her silver coat already draped over her shoulders. She looked at Veronica with a mixture of pity and disgust. I am leaving, Veronica, Camille said. I think I have seen enough. She turned and walked out the door. The silence that followed was heavy. The air was sucked out of the room. The Kingsleys were standing in the wreckage of their empire, stripped bare in front of the people they had spent a lifetime trying to impress. Veronica turned her gaze back to me. Her eyes were not filled with remorse. They were filled with hate. pure, unadulterated hate. She couldn't attack the bank. She couldn't attack Miles. So she attacked the only target she felt she was superior to. You, she spat, pointing a shaking finger at me. You did this, you vicious little gold digger. You planned this from the beginning, didn't you? You saw a wealthy family and you thought you could trap my son, and when you realized we were too smart for you, you decided to burn it down. She laughed, a manic sound. And look at you, standing there in a dress you probably bought with a stolen credit card, pretending to be high and mighty. You are nothing, you are a leech, you wanted our money. And now that you know there is none, you are throwing a tantrum. I stood on the edge of the stage. I looked down at her. I don't need your money, Veronica, I said. I have never needed your money. Oh, please, she sneered. You drive a car that barely starts. You live in a shoebox. I live in a shoebox because I travel 200 days a year consulting for the Federal Reserve and the London Stock Exchange, I said calmly. I drive that car because I don't care what people like you think of me. My net worth is not tied to the hood ornament of my vehicle. I took a step down the stairs, closing the distance between us. And as for trapping you? You are right about one thing. I did plan this, but I didn't do it for profit. I paused, letting the room settle. I did it because 3 months ago, my investment firm, the one where I am a silent partner, was approached to buy a tranche of distressed commercial debt. High risk, high yield. I saw the name on the file. Kingsley Group. Veronica's face went slack. Gordon looked up sharply. I recognized the name because Ethan was dating me. I continued. So I looked closer. I saw the irregularities. I saw the signs of a Ponzi scheme. And I knew that if that debt was sold on the open market, some innocent pension fund or small bank would buy it and lose millions when you inevitably collapsed. I took another step. So I bought it. What? Ethan breathed. I bought the debt, Ethan. I said, well, my fund did, but I control the asset, which means I am not just your fiancé, I am your primary creditor. The crowd gasped. It was the twist that no one saw coming. The poor girl wasn't just rich, she was the boss. I bought a 20% stake in your outstanding liabilities, I explained. It cost me a significant amount of capital, but it gave me the legal right to demand a forensic audit. It gave me the right to see the books. It gave me the right to access the server logs for Project Aegis. I looked at Sloane. It is how I found your boat. Sloane, as a creditor, I have a right to know where my money went. Veronica looked like she had been slapped. She staggered back, clutching her husband's arm for support, but Gordon pulled away from her. You own the debt, Veronica whispered. I own you. I corrected her cold. And the reason I did it was to stop you. I knew you were looking for a fall guy. I knew you were looking for a director to sign those papers so you could default and blame it on incompetence while you kept the cash. I stood here tonight to make sure that when this ship goes down, you are the ones on the bridge. The crowd was looking at me differently now. It wasn't just shock. It was respect. In a room full of sharks, I had just revealed myself to be a megalodon. Ethan stepped forward. Tears were streaming down his face. He looked broken, but it was a selfish kind of brokenness. He wasn't crying for his father. He was crying for his lifestyle. Natalie, he sobbed. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know about the boat. I didn't know about the debt being that bad. Mom told me we just needed a signature. She said it was a formality. She manipulated me. He reached out, trying to grab my hand again. She made me do it. You know how she is. She controls everything. I am a victim here too. Natalie, please, you have to believe me. I love you. I looked at him. I looked at the man I had spent months with. I saw the weakness that I had mistaken for kindness. I saw the cowardice that I had mistaken for gentleness. She manipulated you. Yes, I said softly. But you are 35 years old. Ethan, you are a grown man. I was trying to save the family, he cried. No, I said, my voice hardening. You were trying to save yourself. You knew about Camille. You knew I was a placeholder. And tonight, when you handed me that pen, you knew what that document meant. You didn't read it, because you didn't want to know. But you knew. I didn't. You chose to lie, I said. Every day, every time you kissed me, every time you looked me in the eye, you made a choice. And tonight, I am making mine. Don't do this, he begged. We can work it out. I can change. I can be the man you want. I don't want a man who needs to be fixed. Ethan, I said. I want a man who doesn't need a scapegoat. Enough. The shout was so loud it cracked voice. It came from Gordon. He pushed past Veronica. He pushed past Sloane. He stood in front of Ethan, his chest heaving. Enough, Ethan, Gordon roared. Stop begging. Have you no dignity left? She beat us. Look at her. She beat us at our own game, and she didn't even have to cheat to do it. Gordon turned to Veronica, for the first time in 30 years. The tired, beaten look was gone from his eyes, replaced by a fury that had been fermenting for decades. And you, Gordon pointed a shaking finger at his wife. You drove us here. You and your obsession with appearances. You pushed me to borrow. You pushed me to lie. You turned our daughter into a thief and our son into a coward. Gordon, Veronica gasped. In front of the guests. To hell with the guests, Gordon yelled. There is no company left. Veronica, it is over. Miles has the proof. The bank is pulling the loan. Natalie owns the debt. We are finished. Do you understand? We are bankrupt. He turned to Sloane. And you, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You better hope you look good in orange, because I am not going to protect you. I am going to hand those checks to the district attorney myself. Sloane burst into tears, collapsing onto the floor in a heap of red silk. Gordon looked at me. He looked tired. He looked old. But he looked straight at me. I am sorry, he said. I know it doesn't mean much now, but I am sorry I let them bring you into this. Thank you, Gordon, I said. I accept your apology. I looked around the room. The show was over. The climax had hit. There was nothing left but the cleanup. I turned to Veronica one last time. She was standing alone, isolated. Ethan was sobbing on the stairs. Sloane was on the floor. Gordon had turned his back on her. You wanted a scandal. Veronica, I said. You wanted to stage a breakup so you could look like the victim. You wanted to ruin my reputation to save yours. I gestured to the room, to the reporters who were frantically typing on their phones, to the bankers who were already on calls with their legal departments, to the socialites who would be talking about this night for the next 20 years. Well, I said, you got your wish. The engagement is over. And the scandal. I smiled. The scandal has just begun. I turned on my heel. I didn't look back. I walked down the center aisle, past the staring faces, past the whispers. I walked out of the ballroom, through the foyer, and out into the cool night air. My car was waiting for me. The valet was standing by it, looking terrified. You can keep the keys, I said to him as I walked past him toward the main gate. I think I will take an Uber. That transmission really is terrible. I walked down the driveway, the gravel crunching under my heels. Behind me, the lights of the Kingsley estate were blazing, but I knew the darkness was already inside. I pulled my phone out of my clutch. I dialed a number. It is done, I said. Good. Miles's voice came through the line. I will have the auditors there at 8 a.m. sharp. Make sure they check the offshore accounts first, I said. Sloane was sloppy? Will do. And Natalie? Yes. Nice dress. I laughed. It was the first real laugh I had laughed in weeks. Thanks, I said. I bought it myself. The silence that followed my declaration about owning the debt was different from the silence that had come before. Before, it was the silence of shock. Now, it was the silence of a funeral. I stood there, watching the reality sink into the bones of the Kingsley family. They were not just embarrassed. They were extinguished. I think we are done here, I said, my voice cutting through the thick atmosphere like a scalpel. I walked down the few steps from the stage, moving with a deliberate slowness. I wasn't running away. I was making an exit. I stopped in front of Arthur Sterling, the bank representative, who looked like he was mentally calculating his severance package. He was clutching his briefcase as if it were a life preserver. "Mr. Sterling," I said, holding out the thick manila envelope I had kept in my clutch all evening. It contained the hard copies, the server logs, the falsified projected earnings, and the trail of the $240,000 Sloan had siphoned into her shell company. "What is this?" Sterling asked, taking the envelope. "This is your cause for action," I replied. "Inside, you will find the original code audit for the Aegis project. It proves the technology was never built. You will also find the bank transfers from the Kingsley operating account to Sloan's private entity. It is enough to trigger a forensic audit immediately. It is enough to freeze their assets before the sun comes up tomorrow." Sterling looked at the envelope, then at me. "Why give this to me? You are a creditor too. If we seize the assets, you lose your investment." I smiled. "I didn't invest in the Kingsley Group to make a profit. Mr. Sterling, I invested to buy a front-row seat to the truth. Consider this my contribution to the banking sector's integrity. Call it a public service." Sterling nodded slowly. He understood. He tucked the envelope under his arm and turned his back on Gordon Kingsley. That small gesture, the turning of a back, was the final seal on the Kingsley fate. I continued walking. I passed Sloan, who was still weeping on the floor. Her red dress pooled around her like spilled wine. She looked up at me, her mascara running in black streaks down her face. She opened her mouth to speak, perhaps to curse me again, but no sound came out. She was empty. The arrogance that had fueled her for 39 years had evaporated, leaving behind nothing but a frightened child who had been caught stealing from the cookie jar. I didn't stop for her. She wasn't worth the pause. But Veronica was not done. She blocked my path to the main aisle. She was trembling, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. She looked like a queen whose castle had been burned to the ground, standing in the ashes and demanding obedience. "You think you can just walk away?" Veronica hissed. "After what you did? I will sue you. Do you hear me? I will sue you for everything you have: defamation, slander, breach of contract. I will drag you through court until you are begging on the street." The guests nearby recoiled. It was pathetic. It was the threat of a person who had forgotten that they no longer held the weapon. I stopped. I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the lines of stress around her mouth, the desperation in her eyes. I saw a woman who had spent her entire life building a fortress of lies, only to be surprised when it collapsed under its own weight. "You want to sue me, Veronica?" I asked, my voice calm and loud enough for everyone to hear. "I encourage you to try. Please, file the paperwork tomorrow." "I will," she screamed. "I will destroy you." "The court system loves data," I said, leaning in slightly. "They love bank records. They love emails. They love recorded timelines of fraud. If you sue me, you open yourself up to discovery. You give me the legal right to subpoena every single piece of paper this family has generated for the last 20 years. Do you really want a judge to look under the rest of the rocks?" Veronica froze. Her mouth snapped shut. She knew. She knew what else was hidden in those accounts. She knew that a lawsuit wouldn't be a battle. It would be a confession. "I didn't think so," I said. I stepped around her. "Natalie." The voice was soft, broken. It was Gordon. He was standing near the buffet table, looking like a man who had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. He wasn't looking at his wife. He was looking at me. There was no anger in his eyes, only a profound, crushing shame. "Mr. Kingsley," I acknowledged him. "I am sorry," Gordon said. It wasn't the polite apology of a host who had run out of wine. It was the heavy final apology of a man realizing his legacy was dust. "I should have stopped it. I saw what they were doing to you. I saw the way they treated you. I stayed silent because I was afraid of losing the house. I didn't realize I'd already lost my home a long time ago. I looked at him. Gordon was a victim of his own passivity. But that didn't absolve him. He had sat at that dinner table. He had watched me be humiliated. He had handed me the pen. "You are right, Gordon," I said gently. "You lived in a house of mirrors. You thought if you just pretended hard enough, the reflection would become real. But you can't pay a mortgage with pretense." "I know," he whispered. "I know that now." "It is a little late for you," I said, "but maybe not too late for your soul. Good luck, Gordon." I turned to leave, but there was one last obstacle. Ethan. He was standing at the foot of the grand staircase. He had stopped crying, but he looked shattered. He looked at me with the eyes of a dog that had been kicked by its master and didn't understand why. "Natalie," he said. He reached out a hand, but he didn't dare touch me. "Please, wait. There is nothing to wait for." "Ethan," I said, "the show is over. The curtain is down." "But us," he stammered. "What about us? I know tonight was a disaster. I know my family is messed up. But I love you. I really do. The feelings the last 3 weeks, not all of it was acting. When we were at the lake, when we laughed, that was real." I stared at him. It was almost impressive. The capacity of the human mind to delude itself. He actually believed that his feelings mattered. He believed that love was a currency that could buy forgiveness for betrayal. "You don't love me, Ethan," I said. "You loved the idea of me. You loved having someone who looked up to you. You loved having a safe harbor while you were out swimming with sharks like Camille." "That is not true," he protested. "I have feelings for you." "Feelings are cheap," I said cold. "Anyone can have feelings. A child has feelings. But character integrity, that is expensive. Ethan, and you are bankrupt." "Natalie, please," he whispered. "I can change. I can leave them. I can come with you." "I don't want you," I said. "I never did. I wanted the truth." I looked past him, scanning the room one last time. The guests were watching us, breathless. They were witnessing the final dissection of the Kingsley heir. I raised my voice slightly, addressing not just Ethan, but the entire room. I wanted them to hear this. I wanted them to remember this. "You all looked at me when I walked in here 3 weeks ago," I said. "You saw my old car, you saw my cheap shoes, and you thought I was poor. You treated me like I was invisible because my bank account didn't have enough zeros." I paused, letting the silence stretch. "But you were wrong. People are not poor because they have little money. People are poor because they have little decency." I looked at Veronica, then at Sloane, and finally back at Ethan. "And you people, you are the poorest people I have ever met." The sentence hung in the air like a guillotine blade. No one moved. No one breathed. I turned my back on them. I walked toward the massive double doors. The crowd parted for me instantly. They stepped back, giving me a wide berth, looking at me with a mixture of fear and reverence. I walked through the parted sea of tuxedos and gowns, my head high, my steps echoing on the marble floor. I pushed open the doors and stepped out into the night. The air was cool and fresh, cleansing after the stifling perfume of the ballroom. I walked down the stone steps. The valet was there, holding the keys to my car. He looked terrified. He had seen the guests leaving, heard the shouting. "Miss," he squeaked, holding out the keys with a trembling hand. Your car." I looked at the keys. The plastic lizard keychain looked ridiculous against his white glove. I took them. "Thank you," I said. I walked over to my dented gray sedan. It was parked next to a Rolls-Royce. It looked out of place, ugly, and battered. But it was mine. I opened the door and slid into the driver's seat. The smell of old upholstery and stale coffee welcomed me. It was the smell of reality. It was the smell of freedom. I reached up and pulled the diamond pins out of my hair, letting the dark strands fall loose around my shoulders. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs, and then exhaled slowly. My shoulders dropped. The tension that I had been carrying for a month finally released. I looked in the rearview mirror. I didn't see the vengeful heiress. I didn't see the director of security architecture. I just saw Natalie. I put the key in the ignition. The engine sputtered, coughed, and then roared to life with that familiar rattling sound. They wanted me to be a pawn, I whispered to the empty car. But I came here to end the game. I shifted the car into gear. I didn't look back at the mansion, glowing like a dying star in the rearview mirror. I didn't look back at the chaos I'd left behind. I pressed the gas, and I drove away, leaving the Kingsleys alone with the only thing they had left: the consequences. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed seeing justice served as much as I enjoyed writing it. Please leave a comment down below and tell me, where are you listening from right now? I would love to know where our community is tuning in from. If you want to hear more stories like this, please make sure to subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button to help this story reach even more people. See you in the next one.